Good evening, everyone. My name is Grace Hayek, and on behalf of the Glencoe Public Library, I welcome you to our webinar tonight on e-cars and solar energy. This Greener Living program is presented in partnership with the Glencoe Sustainability Task Force. Special thanks to Barney Gallagher for his work in initiating and helping develop this event. This program has two parts and two presenters, Sam Sperling on e-cars and Josh Lutton, who will discuss solar energy for the home. I will introduce Sam now and Josh later. Glencoe native Sam Sperling has been working in the electric vehicle industry for nearly a decade. He joined Tesla just as it was starting from the first from the ground up electric vehicle, the Model S. He worked on product decisions, analyzing what Tesla should make itself versus what it should buy from suppliers, and on high performance, low cost battery cells. Sam then moved to Proterra, a company focused on heavy-duty electric vehicles. Currently, Sam leads product management organization at Sila Nanotechnologies, a company that develops battery materials that enable higher energy, lower cost lithium-ion batteries.
Awesome. Thanks, Grace. Well, thanks everyone for joining. Excited to talk to you all about electric vehicles. I wanted to give a brief introduction of myself, and Grace gave a great overview, and then really want to focus on three primary areas. One is to talk about why EVs and the value of EVs from a sustainability perspective. The second is to talk about the drivers of EV growth. We've seen a lot of growth in the last few years in the adoption of electric vehicles and the projections for electric vehicles moving forwards. And so I want to share some of that data and talk about why that's happening. And then finally, want to talk about the existing challenges that exist for EVs to reach their full potential. And I'm going to talk about sort of two products that I've worked on that are trying to address some of those challenges. And then finally, we'll have some time at the end after Josh's presentation to do some follow-up Q&A. So Grace gave a little bit of an overview of myself. I actually grew up in Glencoe, about a 10-minute walk from the Glencoe Library, and ended up going to school outside of Boston at Amherst College. That was actually where I got interested in sustainable transportation. I did my senior thesis on corn stover biofuels, which is taking the waste from corn production and making a biofuel, which was a very interesting topic to spend my senior year on. Also convinced me that sort of the future of electric vehicle, or the future of sustainability was in transportation, was electric vehicles. And so I ended up going to Tesla and Proterra. And one of my realizations from working in electric vehicles for about 8 years was, if we're really going to get to, the next level for electric vehicles, we've got to get to the sort of next generation of battery materials. And so that's where I came to Sila in 2020 to work on the battery materials that would enable better batteries to go into Tesla, Proterra vehicles, and all sorts of other electric vehicles. So really excited to share sort of my passion with you on electric vehicles and talk about the industry and where it's going in the future. So I'll start with just a little bit of high level context. Climate change is being driven by greater emissions of carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases. You can see here just two charts that are showing global surface temperature rises over time and the corresponding increases in carbon dioxide emissions and atmospheric concentrations. And so if we're going to really solve climate change, we have to drive down our emissions of carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases. So if we look at the major drivers of greenhouse gases, what's shown on the left is global greenhouse gas emissions, and on the right is US. And you can see that globally, transportation accounts for just under 15% of emissions, and in the United States, just under 30%. So it is one of the biggest sources of emissions of greenhouse gases, both in the United States and in the world. And so if we think about electric vehicles, really the primary value proposition related to sustainability and what got me excited was their ability to significantly lower emissions compared to internal combustion engine vehicles. And so what you can see on the left is a chart that shows lifetime emissions in terms of CO2 for ICEs, internal combustion engines, versus battery electric vehicles. And you can see that even in 2020, the emissions from battery electric vehicles are significantly lower than internal combustion engine vehicles in multiple locations in the world. And that will only get better as we look out to the future. Josh will talk to us later about solar, and solar, wind, and other renewable energies are one of the primary drivers of how electric vehicles will get more and more sustainable. Because you can see in the bucket on the left, electric vehicles in the green boxes here still have a significant amount of emissions. And that's because the energy that's being used to charge those electric vehicles is coming from the grid, which is a mix of renewable resources like solar and wind, but also non-renewable resources that have their own emissions, such as natural gas and coal. And so by the time we get to 2030, the assumption and some of all the projections is that our grid will be significantly cleaner. And so each year you drive that electric vehicle, it'll be cleaner and cleaner to operate. In addition to that, we expect that the battery manufacturing emissions will continue to decrease over time as we find supply chains that are lower cost and lower emissions to make batteries. So I mentioned in my introduction that EV sales have been increasing and are expected to further increase in the future. And there are many reasons why this is the case, but I see four primary drivers of why this is happening. One is that better products are coming to market. We're seeing longer range, faster charging, and more charging stations. In addition, we're seeing lower price products, which are able to reach more segments of the market. In addition to that, there are significant policy and OEM commitments, which are driving adoption in a variety of markets. And finally, we're seeing more and more customer exposures to EVs as more people are seeing their neighbors have EVs or are just seeing them out in the market and are experiencing both the benefits of EVs and are starting to see that some of the initial concerns they may have had about EVs are not so daunting. But with that being said, there still are some significant challenges that exist to realize the full potential of EVs. We need to deliver lower price, longer range, and better charging EVs. In addition to that, we need to ramp up the supply chain so that we can meet the growth of electric vehicles while driving down costs and doing so in a more sustainable way. So with that context in mind, I'll move into a little bit of data to just share what has happened in the EV industry over the last few years and why that's happened. So what's shown here is a chart from the International Energy Agency, which is showing EV growth over time. And what you can see is that EVs accounted for just under 9% of new passenger vehicle sales in 2021. And that was about 2x where it was in 2020. In those, that growth has been driven primarily by Europe and China. And while the US is growing, we're still definitely trailing Europe and China in EV adoption. And not only have we seen significant growth in moving in recent years, but the forecasts of where EV growth will go in the future have increased significantly. So what's shown here is a 2016 forecast from Bloomberg New Energy Finance that was projecting that by 2040, 35% of the worldwide market would be using battery electric vehicles or would be buying battery electric vehicles. In their most recent forecast in 2021, that number was up to just under 60%. So a huge increase both in the numbers of battery electric vehicles that are being purchased today, as well as what's being forecasted for the future. And so it's really interesting to just look back, even 2 years ago, and there's been such a shift in the industry. This chart is a little bit, maybe a few months out of date, and so you can see the BEV penetration data is not exactly the same, but the major message here is really accurate, where pre-COVID, we were talking about billions of dollars being invested in China, and Tesla was making some big investments. And there were sort of a few companies that were serious about electric vehicles, but most of the OEMs were really looking at how can we sort of outsource the batteries that we're buying, and sort of like get a few EVs to market, but not being really serious about it. In comparison, you look at today and truly trillions of dollars are being spent across the globe by many, many companies. And as you look at the companies that are serious about making vehicles, almost all of them are looking at seriously insourcing and being really focused on their battery electric vehicle strategy. And part of the, given by all those changes, you can see that current projections have battery electric vehicles projected to surpass internal combustion engine vehicles between 2030 and 2035, which is significantly earlier than was projected in projections just a few years ago. So that's the state of electric vehicles and both the growth that we've seen recently and the increase in projections of what is expected in the coming years. So let's talk about why that's happening. The biggest reason is really that better products are coming to market. Longer range, faster charging of the vehicles and more charging stations that are out in the world to charge those vehicles. So this is a chart from Bloomberg New Energy Finance, which shows the range of a variety of vehicles that have been launched from 2008 through 2022. And what you can see is, as you move left to right, there are many more options. So a lot more vehicles that are out in the world. You can also see that the top end of the range has gotten higher. So we have longer and longer range vehicles that are available for those that want the longest range vehicle, and the average range of vehicles has increased. So even your sort of run-of-the-mill electric vehicle is getting a longer range. In addition to that, charging rates have increased. Now this chart is a little bit of an eyesore, but it captures the charging speeds of many of the vehicles that are out in the market. And higher power charging means you can add more energy in a given period of time. That's particularly important when you're on sort of the longer road trips in which people have historically had the range anxiety about using electric vehicles. So you can see that in just the past 5 years, the fastest charging times have increased by 2x. Now, having a fast charging vehicle is just one part of the equation. You also need the infrastructure to be able to charge that vehicle. And this is just one company. I was obviously at Tesla, and so have a little bit of a bias towards showing Tesla data. And I think they are the sort of at the forefront of charging infrastructure expansion. But a lot of companies are sort of taking similar steps to build out their charging infrastructure. So when I joined Tesla in 2012, we had no superchargers, none of these ultra fast charging stations that are available to Tesla vehicles. By 2013, we had a few out in the world. And then if you look at today, there are over 30,000 superchargers. Having personally driven in Teslas many times, I know the sort of ubiquity of these charging stations and the ease of using them. So in addition to having the better products, EVs are also able to lower their prices over time. And the primary driver of being able to drive down costs has been the reduction in battery prices. Cell and pack costs have dropped by almost 90% since 2010. And that's really been driven by A, scale, and B, technology improvements at both the cell, module, and pack level. And what that has meant is that battery electric vehicles will soon be cost competitive to make and buy on an unsubsidized upfront basis. And that doesn't even factor in the sort of operational savings from lower fuel cost. Your electricity to power an electric vehicle will be lower than using gasoline, and the reduced maintenance because an electric vehicle is simpler and has fewer moving parts. And so factoring in those operational savings as well as incentives that exist in the market today, many EVs are actually at price parity already today. So in addition to these better products at a lower price, policy and OEM commitments are really accelerating the growth of electric vehicles. 17 countries have already committed to completely phase out ICE vehicles. And you can see some of the examples on the left showing the existing EV share of sales today and the year at which those countries have committed to phase out ICE vehicles. Those have been mostly European countries to date, but even in the United States, we have about 25% of auto sales that are under state level phase out subsidies policies. And while China does not show up on this and they do not have phase out targets, they are heavily supporting the electric vehicle industry and driving a lot of the growth there. Not surprisingly, with better, lower price products and strong policy commitments, you're seeing the OEMs that are making strong commitments as well. This chart just shows a few of the larger OEMs and the number of models they're committing to being electric, the sales that they are committing to, and the percentage of their sales that they are committing to be electric. So all across the board, you're seeing the major automakers really being all in on electric vehicles. And the final point here is that as you have more electric vehicles that are out in the world and better products, you just have more customer exposure to EVs and really being able to experience the benefits of EVs. One thing that we saw at Tesla was we'd see these clusters of electric vehicles where one customer would buy an electric vehicle and then their neighbor would drive it and would buy one, and another neighbor would drive it and buy one. And as you really experience, both the sustainability aspects, but also just how fun it is to drive an electric vehicle, more and more people will adopt it and get rid of the anxieties that they may have had with electric vehicles. So there's been a lot of growth in electric vehicles and a lot of excitement about the future. But the reality is that the products that are in the market today, need to get better to get to the projections that are being shown over time. We need to continue to drive down price, have longer range vehicles, create a better charging experience, and ramp up the supply chain in a way that continues to drive down cost while improving environmental sustainability. I'll finish by talking about two of the products that I've personally worked on that have tried to attack these challenges in different ways. The first one that I will talk about was a product I worked on at Proterra, really focused on creating better charging hardware. So at Proterra, we were really focused on charging infrastructure for large fleets of electric buses, trucks, and vans. And our pain point was that previous charging systems were okay for small deployments, 10, 15, 20 buses, but they were too expensive, large, and unreliable for full fleet electrification, so hundreds of electric buses. What we came to market with was a 1.5 megawatt charger. And so this large box that you see at the top replaced 10 to 20 individual chargers. And so that we were able to roll out a charging solution that had a lower cost footprint and higher reliability to really enable that fleet scale electrification. I'll then finish by talking about what I'm working on today at Sila, which really touches on all aspects of the challenge to realize the potential electric vehicles. At Sila, we're looking to make lower cost, longer range, better charging batteries while ramping up a supply chain that can meet the high volume needs of electric vehicles. So our approach from Sila is we're developing a drop-in anode powder. In a battery today, you have in your anode, you have graphite, and we're looking to make a silicon material that can be dropped into the battery and enable a 20 to 40% higher energy density. And that can be done with the existing lithium ion factories that are out in the world today and using global commodity precursors and bulk manufacturing techniques so that we can ramp our production quickly and get to scale. And in addition to this high-level development approach, we're looking to go through three markets. One is smaller consumer electronics, which is small volume, high price, then move into cell phones, which are medium volume and medium price, and finally move into our final market of electric vehicles, which is high volume and low price. Moving into those original markets allows us to get into market and get a lot of the learnings at a smaller scale and a higher price point that will more effectively allow us to move into electric vehicles. And we're actually in the market today. I have the first product with Sila material on my wrist. This was a battery we made with a cell manufacturing partner and a company called Whoop, which makes a fitness tracker. And they, in concert with their battery manufacturer, were able to make a battery that had 17% more energy density than their previous battery. And that was combined with other reductions, allowing them to reduce the size of their battery by 33% while maintaining the same battery life. And this is just an example of how we work with customers, both with the end product maker, a company such as Whoop or BMW or Daimler, as well as the cell manufacturer. So we'll work with the end device maker to really understand the value of our product and their final product specifications. But then we'll actually send our powder to a cell maker that'll make it into a cell and send it to the final device maker to put it into their product. So in this way, we're really able to work with the end device maker to understand the value and the requirements for their product, while also working with the cell maker because we send a powder as opposed to making the full battery. And as we think about how this applies to electric vehicles, we can sort of take two primary approaches. One is to make a lower cost vehicle with the same performance. So we can take an existing battery pack that's maybe a certain size, make it 80% of the size and lower cost while delivering the same range. The other approach that we can take is take the same area that's available with the car, put 20% more energy density in it, and have it be a longer range, faster charging vehicle. And we can do this all with existing cell factories. So this is an existing factory today and a schematic of what goes into the factory and how it moves through cell manufacturing. And you notice this box at the bottom that says anode powder. The only change with Sila is it's now a Sila anode powder that goes into that process. So with my last minute, I'll just come back to the slides that I went through. And I hope that there are three main takeaways that you have from this discussion. One is an understanding of why EVs matter and are important for addressing climate change. The second is why there has been such rapid growth in EV adoption and projections moving forward. And then finally, an understanding of the challenges that remain and how at least two companies are working to solve those types of challenges.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Sam. What a treat to hear the insider's view of the background, the backstory of electric vehicles. And I'd like to welcome Josh Schletten. Josh began his career at Motorola and then moved on to become a managing partner at Woodlawn Associates, which is a consulting firm providing advisory services to solar equipment manufacturers, financiers, and solar installers. In 2018, he founded Certasun, a home solar company serving homeowners in Illinois and Wisconsin. Raised in Mequon, Wisconsin, Josh now lives in Glencoe, and he's presented on this topic before, so welcome back. Josh, you can go ahead with your presentation now. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Grace. And thank you, Sam. That was fascinating to hear more about the upstream part of our broader business. And I'm going to focus a lot on the downstream portion as soon as I get my presentation going. All right, I think you can probably see my screen now. If we're having any trouble, Grace will let me know. So I'm going to talk about residential solar and electric vehicle charging for your home. Certasun, as Grace mentioned, I founded in 2018, which is when Illinois changed its laws to make solar much more attractive here. And this is an example of one of the systems that we installed locally. Certasun is headquartered in Buffalo Grove, and as Grace says, I live in Glencoe. We serve all of Chicagoland and southeastern Wisconsin with residential rooftop solar and electric vehicle chargers. We also offer battery energy storage systems to provide backup for customers that want to have more energy security. And we've installed more than 1,000 solar systems since 2018. And have a pretty spectacular reputation on the internet and with various rating sites. In fact, we were just rated one of the top 10 quality installers in the entire country just recently. I am the founder and president of CertaSun, and I live in Glencoe with my wife and 2 sons. Most people know that one good reason to buy solar is that it's good for the environment. But what you may not know is that solar is also much cheaper than buying energy from your utility. The solar system on the left in the slide here produces about 9,000 kilowatt hours of energy per year, which is approximately what a typical single family home in the United States consume. Some consume more, obviously, and some consume less, but 9 or 10,000 kilowatt hours is a fairly typical home. And we can produce that with solar panels on the roof of the home. So in this example, this homeowner is producing 9,000 fewer, they're producing 9,000 kilowatt hours with their solar system. And that means they're buying 9,000 fewer kilowatt hours from their utility. Here in Illinois and in Wisconsin, each utility kilowatt hour costs us 12 to 13 cents. And so this customers would save about $1,000 a year on their electricity bills from their utility from having the solar system. So how does a solar system work at a very high level? The solar panels convert the electricity from the sun or the sunlight into DC electricity. DC is direct current, and that's the same kind of electricity that is stored in batteries, like in an EV, in a car, or in your cell phone, or just a regular old AA battery or a car battery. Those are all producing DC electricity. A solar system then has inverters or microinverters that convert that electricity into AC power, alternating current. That's the kind of electricity that comes out of all the outlets in your home. And then the solar system connects to your home at the breaker panel or at the meter. And then finally, the utilities meter measures your net consumption of electricity. A question that we often get is whether you need batteries with your solar system. And the answer is emphatically no. Your system could produce more energy than you're using at certain times of the day. In fact, it almost certainly will on a sunny afternoon, particularly if you're not using the air conditioning. That electricity will flow backwards into the utilities grid. In Glencoe, our utility is ComEd or Commonwealth Edison, but that's pretty much true in any utility. So that electricity goes back into the grid, but you get a credit for it so that when you need to use electricity later from the grid, you don't have to pay for it. So for example, at night, obviously your solar system would not be producing any electricity, but if you'd sent electricity into the grid during the day, you would be able to use those credits. And over the course of the year, all of that nets out so that, as I said before, we can produce typically as much energy as the home consumes over the course of a year in that same year with the solar system. However, batteries do provide protection in case of a power outage, and obviously they're cleaner and quieter than generators. Net metering is the technical term for what I described when the solar system sends energy back into the grid, and then you get to use credits that are produced by that later on. The graph that we're looking at here, the blue bars represent the electricity that a homeowner is using, and the orange bars represent the electricity that he or she is producing with his or her solar system. So let's take a look at January, for example. A couple things you notice there. One is that the solar production is much lower than it is in June or July or August. And I don't think that would be surprising to you. My solar panels were covered with snow for about a week, a week or so ago. They don't produce energy when they're covered with snow. And the second thing you notice is this homeowner consumed a little bit more energy than he produced in January. But that situation changes in the spring, in April, May, and June, when we start getting longer and sunnier days. And frankly, this customer probably isn't running his air conditioner in May or June. And so the solar system is producing more energy than he's consuming. That flows backwards into the grid and gives him a credit that he can then subsequently use. Let's look at October and November, when the sun, when there's not as much sunlight again. He's going to use the credits that he's generated in May and June to cover the electricity that he is consuming in November and December and the subsequent January. So one question that we get a lot is, what is my electric bill going to look like? This is an example of a bill. You probably all have bills that look an awful lot like this one, except that yours is probably bigger than $16. This is a very typical result from a solar system from CertaSun. There are certain unavoidable charges that we have that amount to about $16. So this customer is basically they're basically producing as much electricity as they're consuming and just paying those unavoidable charges. What you see here in sort of the, I guess you might be able to see my pointer, in this meter information, what's probably different about this bill than yours is that this one has a kilowatt hours from grid, which is how much he's pulled from ComEd, and a kilowatt hours to grid, which is how much electricity he sent back to ComEd during this billing cycle. And you can see that number is bigger. And so what it's saying here is that he's going to carry over those 16 kilowatt hours and be able to use them in a future period. Oh, there it is with the fancy fancy animation. Oh, here we go. Okay. The second question we get a lot is whether homes are suitable for solar. And there's a few basic questions that you can ask to answer that question. One is, do you own your home? And that's simply because companies like CertaSun can't build solar on a roof that you don't own. You don't have the right typically to allow something to be built there. So you have to own your home. The second is, you typically want an electricity bill that's $75 a month or more, because if it's really low already, it may not be worth the overhead that's involved in building a really small solar system to offset a really small bill. You also want a roof that's in good condition. It doesn't have to be brand new, but it shouldn't be a roof that needs to be replaced in just 2 or 3 years. That would make sense either to just replace it now or to give us a call in 2 or 3 years when you have replaced your roof. And you want at least part of your roof to face west, south, or east, or be flat. While solar panels will produce electricity even if they face north, just by the way that the sun moves through the sky in northern Illinois and in southern Wisconsin, solar panels that face south produce more energy, those that faced east or west a little bit less, and those that face north less still. So we like to see south, west, or east, or flat. And then of course we want to see a roof that's relatively unshaded. You can see this home that we installed a couple of years ago. There's a tree here on the right side, but obviously that tree is not so big that it's going to shade those solar panels. But my home, for instance, there was a 100-year-old oak tree immediately south of my house and shaded all of the south-facing roof, at least until the tree unfortunately died last year. So looking at adding another solar system to my house to take advantage of that south-facing roof that's newly unshaded. I thought what Sam said about electric vehicles and batteries was fascinating, and I'm going to talk a little bit about EV charging just in your own home. And just a couple things to know. If you buy an EV, you're going to want to install what's called a level 2 charger in your home. That's sort of fancy speak for a charger that operates at 240 volts instead of the 120 volts that most of the outlets in your home operate at. That allows the vehicle to charge more quickly. And a level 2 charger will charge virtually any any car or consumer truck from empty to full overnight. You can purchase the charger anywhere, but you're going to need an electrician to permit and install it. And it typically adds about 4,000 kilowatt hours to a home's annual electricity consumption. Obviously, that depends on how much you drive. Since, as I say here, the average home is 11,000 kilowatt hours. It's a little bit less than a 40% increase in your electricity use if both your EV and your home are average. A couple of things that you want to consider, just like before you decide to go solar. Do you have 200 or 400 amp service into your home? Most homes in Glencoe would, but some older homes might have 100 amp or even 60 amp service. We've installed on homes that have that, but most typically they would need to be upgraded to handle the increased load from an EV. You want to have slots available in your breaker panel. Again, that's not a showstopper, but it is a little bit more cost effective if there are empty slots in the service panel that we can just use. And then, of course, some of the cost is driven in part by how far away from the main service panel where you want your EV charger is. Typically in your garage, but it could be on the side of your house by your driveway. Oops, I really hit my space bar. You want to know whether your EV supply equipment, that's what EVSE stands for, does that require hardwiring, like the Tesla wall connector that our electrician Quinn is holding there in the picture, or do you just want a 240 volt outlet installed so you can plug in a charger that has an outlet? And don't forget that it does take some time to get permits. You want to make sure that this is done safely and doesn't overload the circuitry in your home. So don't wait until the day before your EV is going to be delivered to call us, because we'll need to come out and look at your home and then apply for a permit, and that can take several weeks to do, and then schedule the installation. There's a new electric vehicle incentive coming in Illinois. This is actually not for the EV charger, but for EVs. This was part of the Clean Energy Jobs Act that was passed on September 15th or 14th. I forget exactly, but was passed in September of last year. And that's going to create a $4,000 incentive for people who buy EVs starting July 1st of this year. So start thinking about which one of those EVs you want to add to your driveway. There was a federal tax credit for the installation of a home charger that was worth up to $1,000, but that has now expired. Given all the conversations about Build Back Better or some version of it, it seems possible that might be renewed. And then finally, some other towns, not Glencoe to my knowledge, do offer additional rebates. This is part of our team here at Certasun. So hopefully you'll see one of these friendly faces at your home sometime soon. This is my family in our backyard in Glencoe with our solar panels that are on our garage. I think we took this last winter. So with that, I think I'll wrap it up and turn it over to Grace to see if we have any questions. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Josh. That was very interesting. Great. Now, we have a number of questions, and I'm going to get started with some for Sam about EVs. Somebody asks, what are batteries made from, and what impact does battery production have on the environment?
Yeah, it's a really good question. It does vary by material, by battery, but some of the major components of batteries are typically nickel, cobalt, copper, aluminum, steel, and graphite. And I think the question of, and I'll try to adjust two of the other questions in the same time about the sort of like payback period and the useful life of battery, because they all sort of overlap. All those materials do have an impact on the environment. Mining can be a pretty dirty business. But if you look at the sort of the overall emissions for electric vehicles, and I think this is a good chart, you'll see that from a lifetime perspective in sort of any location in the world, the lifetime emissions from an EV are significantly lower than an internal combustion engine vehicle. And there's a few reasons why this will only get better over time. One is, as Josh and many others put more solar and wind and others out there in the world, you'll see that the lifetime emissions will continue to get lower and lower. But the second is, you'll see that the materials that are going into the battery will be more and more sustainable. There's a really big push for more ethically and sustainably mined minerals, which will be part of the equation, and there's a greater focus into sustainability in the supply chain. But the other thing that'll be really impactful is recycling. And so what many people see as a concern about electric vehicles, they're concerned about what's going to happen to the vehicle at the end of life, is actually a real positive, because the reality is that the batteries in electric vehicles are sort of like the best mine in the world. Like, they have nickel and cobalt and copper and aluminum and all these materials that are incredibly valuable. And so there are quite a few very well-funded and advanced efforts to sort of improve battery recycling from where it's today, so that all of the valuable metals that are in the battery, which are sort of encompassing most of the impact of making them in the first place, will be recycled. So if you looked at this chart in 2040 or 2050 or 2060, you'd see that the purple part of this, which is the impact of producing the battery, would be lower and lower, because you'd see more and more of those metals that are just going to be in a closed loop. They'll be in an EV, maybe they'll have a second use as like a backup battery for solar in one of Josh's applications. And then eventually they'll be torn down, recycled, and made into new batteries again. So I'm personally very optimistic about how the industry can continue to get better. It's already better than an ICE today, and it will only get better over the coming years.
Thank you. We have a couple of questions about range. What about cold weather impacting the range of EVs, and what is technology looking at improving that? And also, just what are the goals for charging times and distances?
Yeah, all great questions. So I'd say in terms of cold weather and range, actually something I spent a lot of time on at Proterra. We had some customers up in Minnesota, which gets pretty cold in the winter, and trying to figure out the best solutions for them to make sure that our buses were able to meet their needs. There are a few buckets that I would say that have been worked on and will continue to be worked on to improve performance of batteries in cold weather. So the first is just having longer range batteries. So if you have a longer range vehicle, then having an impact from colder weather, you still end up with a longer range. So that's one thing. The second is having more ubiquitous and faster charging infrastructure. So if you're not able to make make a certain drive on one charge, it's really easy to go and charge and spend 20 minutes charging up your vehicle, and then you can make it to your final destination. And then the third part I would say is an optimization of your electric vehicle. So there's a lot of things that can be done on the vehicle, such as heat recirculation, more efficient tires, sort of like smart heating and cooling. And there are many things that are being done on electric vehicles and will continue to be done on electric vehicles so that cold weather performance is optimized. In terms of charge time, I'd say the standard out there in the world today is about 30 minutes to add 80% of capacity. So you can go from, let's say, 5% battery to 85% battery in 30 minutes. That's usually about the time, if you're on a long distance trip, that you stop, you go in and get a sandwich, eat your sandwich, you come back, your car is pretty much filled up. That's good, but the industry is also pushing to significantly improve that. So I'd say there are different specs for different vehicles. The most common target that you hear is to get to about 15 minutes to add 80% of energy. And I think an important point to make to that is the vast majority of EV users very, very infrequently ever need to fast charge. So 99% of their charging is typically, they come home, they plug it in overnight, they have 8 hours or 12 hours to charge, and it's not a big issue. That fast charging is really for, I'd say, long road trips and for a corner case of customers that do need to charge more frequently on a consistent basis.
Thank you. Let's switch to some solar questions now, and then we'll probably end up going back to EVs afterward. What if Jacqueline asks, what if after you have panels installed and you need to replace the roof? What happens then?
Yeah, and it's happened to some of our customers, both due to it wearing out and due to storm damage, although infrequent. We have to take the solar panels off your roof in order to have new shingles put on, typically shingles, but really any roof surface. And so, like I said, your roof does not have to be new to put solar on, but we would not recommend putting it on if your roof clearly is if a replacement is going to be needed in the near future. When we take them off, we typically store them safely in your garage or some other location on your property. We prefer not to transport them. That just increases the risk of breakage. But we take them off. That might take a half a day. And then when your roof project is complete, we'll come and reinstall them. We don't need a permit for any of that because we're just replacing something that was already there. It does cost a few $1,000s to do this what we call remove and replace. But our typical customer is saving on the order of $20,000 on their electricity bills from their solar system. So to avoid putting solar on because you might need to replace, do one of these remove replaces sometime in the future seems like it would be cutting off your nose to spite your face.
Thank you. Another question, how do you assess whether your roof is suitable for solar? And if my roof is flat, will the solar panel be visible from the street?
I think I had a slide about whether your roof is suitable. So just real quickly, is it too old, as we've talked about just there for a minute? Second, does it face east, west, or south, or is it flat? Do you own it? And is it shaded or not? Those would be the primary considerations. If your roof is flat, whether it's visible from the street or not really will depend on your particular roof. Our installations typically would be about 6 inches on a flat roof, not on a tilted roof. Our installations are just a couple inches off the roof, but on a flat roof, they might be 6 inches off the roof. So depending on how far from the edge it is, or whether there's a parapet or something like that, It could depend on whether it's visible or not.
Okay, thank you. A couple questions about cost. One person, both of them want to know what's the average cost for solar panel installation on a home in Glencoe, and then also what is the cost of an EV charger and panel for a home?
Sure. Let me just take the EV charger one first because it's both smaller and simpler. That's typically around $1,500. It can range a little bit lower and a little bit higher depending on some of the things that I mentioned in my presentation about how far it is from your breaker panel to where you want the charger to be, whether your breaker panel already has blank slots in it where we can put circuit breakers, and a few other things like that. But as a budgetary number, $1,500 would be a reasonable place to sort of hang your hat. In terms of a solar system, a typical system here in Illinois would be a gross price of $25,000 if you were to just purchase it outright. That would obviously be reduced by the incentives, and those could bring the cost down to on the order of $12,000 after the incentives. And then I would also mention that financing is available for these systems, and the really cool math with solar these days is that even if you were to finance the entire cost of your solar system, the payment on a loan for the solar system would typically be less than you would pay for the same amount of electricity from your utility. So the question of like, how much does it cost is a little bit complicated because at one extreme, the answer is $25,000, and that can seem kind of scary. But at the other extreme, it can be, well, you don't pay anything up front and your net cost of electricity goes down by $20 or $30 a month. So it doesn't really cost you anything.
Thank you. Another person wants to know, what's the lifespan of a solar panel?
Depends on the quality of the panel, but can be 25 or 40 years.
Wow.
The equipment we sell is warranted for 25 years.
Okay, thank you. And then I'm going to take one more solar question, and then we're going to bounce back to EVs. Will there be any advances in the future regarding solar panel technology that might make my current panels redundant or obsolete?
No. If you bought solar panels, they're going to save you money, whether or not someday there's a better solar panel. And I can guarantee you there will be better solar panels in the future, just like there are better computers in the future than there are now. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't buy a computer now.
Excellent question. Excellent answer. Thank you. Let's go back to. Sorry, there are a lot of questions here. I'm kind of scrolling through. Oh, here's a question for you, Sam. What's the probability of Tesla sharing its large charging network with other OEMs?
Yeah, great question. They're actually starting to. So Tesla recently began a pilot in I think a few countries in Europe that is sort of piloting out sharing their charging infrastructure with others. It's very doable. The concern that Tesla has had is that other cars can't charge as quick. And so you could have other cars that are sort of hogging the spots, and then Tesla cars won't be able to access that charging infrastructure quite as quickly. So that's the concern. Tesla has said they want to do that more and more. And so this pilot is meant to sort of see how it goes. And if the results are positive, they may open up that charging infrastructure in more places in the world.
Interesting. Thank you. Another question. I've heard that the cost to produce an EV is as much as a regular car, and that the payback period to offset the carbon inputs is nearly a decade. Is that true?
No. So I'll go back to, maybe I like this graph, we just showed it for a second. And it does depend. It depends on where your electric vehicle is produced and how clean is the energy that you're using from it. So all those factors matter. But even in sort of the worst situation where the grid is pretty dirty and the electric vehicle is produced in a fairly unsustainable way, you're still getting to a better perspective from CO2 emissions before the life of the vehicle. And in places that are better, it's significantly better, and that payback happens much earlier. And to the earlier point, it's only going to get better and better. All the elements related to electric vehicles, whether it's the energy that's being used or the emissions that are going into the vehicle, into making that battery, are continuing to improve and will only get better and better. If you compare that to an internal combustion engine vehicle, there's no path to improve those emissions over time. So it'll sort of stay what it is.
Okay, thank you. Someone else wants to know, does the battery last the lifetime of the car?
Yes, and in some cases beyond that. There are certain chemistries that last longer and shorter, but there have continued to be advancements. They will last the lifetime of the car. And what we've started to see is these pilots of second life, where the car is no longer useful, but you're taking the battery out and using it for other applications.
Right.
So I think we'll just
that,
continue to see it be more and more valuable in that way.
Okay, thank you. And I don't know if you can answer this question or not, but someone asked, are there any future plans to build electric trains that go long distances?
Yeah, there are actually a fair number of electric trains that are already out in the world. Actually, in my area, in the Bay Area, they're actually working to electrify one of our train lines more frequently in trains. Instead of having batteries, they'll just have a direct tie into the grid. And so, you have places like in Japan, for example, with their fast trains that are, almost all electric, or if not all electric, and you're basically just being able to sort of like charge it continuously or sort of power it continuously as you're moving along. You're able to do that because you have a set area where you can put tie-ins directly to those trains. So I think we'll see fewer battery electric trains, but many electric trains that are just tied in directly to the grid and to a power source.
Okay, thank you. You alluded earlier to the fun of driving an EV. I've never driven one. Probably there are others who in the audience who have not. Can you tell us just a little bit about that? Why are they fun to drive?
Yeah, there are a few reasons. I think to me, the first one, which is the most fun, is when you have electric vehicles, you're able to get what's called instant torque. So in an internal combustion engine vehicle, when you hit the accelerator, you basically need to overcome losses within your engine for a small period of time before the vehicle ends up moving forwards. You don't really notice it because you've been driving an internal combustion engine vehicle your whole life. But once you drive an electric vehicle, you hit the accelerator and the car just takes off. And it's completely different than an internal combustion engine vehicle and is so fun. There's a new electric truck that's coming out called a Rivian. And I got to drive in one this past weekend, and it has a 0 to 60 in 3 seconds, which is way faster than any car needs to go 0 to 60. But the 0 to 60 doesn't even give the full story, because it's like 0 to 20 or 0 to 30 is the thing that you like particularly feel. So that's one element. And the second element is electric vehicles, the majority of, or a lot of their weight is in the battery, which in most vehicles is on the floor of the vehicle. And so the handling and turning of the vehicle just feels so solid. One story from time at Tesla was there was a test, a safety test, where they basically take a vehicle and they drive it up this ramp and they try to flip it over to see what's called roof crush. And the Tesla, the center of gravity of the vehicle was so low that they couldn't actually flip it over. It would just slide on its side. And so what that means is, as you're going around turns or cornering, like you're feeling so low to the ground and the car feels so stable. So those and many other attributes just make it so much fun to drive.
Thank you.
Mhm.
That sounds like a trip.
Yes.
I'm going to end with 2 more questions for Josh, and then we're going to wrap it up, I think. This is relating to EVs, Josh. Someone wants to know, can you install a solar panel just for an EV?
The practical answer is probably not. of course, if you had an electric vehicle that you used enough, it might be worth it to build a solar system. But we, for instance, would not be able to build a solar system of 1 or 2 panels on your house. We could technically do it, but we would have to charge you so much that you would accuse us of fraud for trying to charge you that much, because there's just a lot of costs that we incur when we build a system that don't scale down to 1 or 2 or 3 panels, right? We still have to do a site assessment. We still have to apply for a permit. We still have to send a team to your house. And all of those things just don't scale down at the sort of 1 to 2 to 3 panel level.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you. And finally, given the benefits that you point to for home solar, what are the primary hurdles to adoption of the technology by a large number of consumers? And what's the industry doing to overcome those hurdles?
That is really
It's a big question.
$1 million question. When solar is cheaper than the grid, why doesn't everybody do it? There is a heck of a lot of inertia. There's a lot of, I've been buying electricity this way forever, and I just don't, I don't think people actively think about it, to be honest. They just are like, this feels a little bit scary to me. I don't completely trust what these solar guys are telling me. And I could just wait 1 more month or 1 more year because I've been doing it the way I've been doing it for 40 or 50 or 60 years. And, I'll just wait and see if something develops or I feel more comfortable with it later. What are people doing to overcome those hurdles? We do that every day. We're trying to get people comfortable. I will say that what Nick said about what Sam said about the, what was the term you used, Sam? It was kind of like a nucleus or a cluster. It was a cluster of customers. We see that happen in solar all the time. Somebody will get it in their neighborhood, and 6 months later, all of a sudden, boom, 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 all around them, people are calling us saying, I want that too. And we think it's just people are looking at it and talking to the neighbor and saying, you mean it actually does, your electricity bill actually does go to $16 when that's not baloney? Oh, okay, maybe I should do that too.
Salesforce on the ground. Well, thank you both for this. I feel like we've had a briefing from the future with the two of you, and you are where many more of us will be in the next few years. So thank you so much for your time and for your sharing your expertise. Thank you everyone in the audience for joining us tonight, and thank you very much everyone. Good night.
Thank you for tuning in, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.